Okay. Welcome to Mormon Book Reviews, where an evangelical encounters the restoration. I'm your host, Stephen Peinecker, and for those of you who've been with us from almost the very beginning, we started at the time we didn't know, but it has become now an annual tradition to talk about a Latter-day Thanksgiving with my good friend Patrick McKay, who's based in the greater Independence area, and he comes from the Restorationist tradition, the old school RLDS, and now he's an independent Restorationist. But that is his background, and you are actually an apostle in your particular group that you're involved in. Patrick is one of the sweetest, most wonderful people I know. I'm glad to call him a friend. And I also, they really, honestly, in many ways, for a lot of people, my introduction to them was attending the very first Book of Mormon Rally that I spoke at a couple of years ago. Of course, he's been doing that before. And I'm thankful for Patrick providing me the platform. And we're going to talk about this year's past Book of Mormon Rally. But first, before we get there, Patrick, welcome back. Happy Thanksgiving.
Well, happy Thanksgiving to you. And it's always great to reconnect once a year and talk about our annual Thanksgiving here in the United States and what it means for Latter-day Saints.
And what I think is really cool, we're going to start off. You just right before we started taping, you actually told me that a real important thing happened to you, something you've always kind of dreamed about. And that is that you actually had the opportunity to talk about Thanksgiving recently at your local LDS Stake Center. Now, think about this, folks. This is not a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This is an independent Restorationist. And here you are speaking at this event and breaking bread and having a dinner afterwards. I want you to tell the audience about that, how that experience went for you. I imagine you're just thrilled that that was able to happen.
Well, as you know, Stephen, I produced a video a few years ago about a common Thanksgiving that Latter-day Saints had. A lot more to add to the story. We have the story, of course, the Pilgrims, but we have the Nephites and the Lamanites who also came to a promised land. And I thought it would be unique if we could add to the Thanksgiving dialogue with the unique perspective of the Book of Mormon. I had thought about this, and this year I contacted a general church authority in the LDS church who I had met, but was just unable to make that connection during the Thanksgiving season. About 2 weeks ago, I woke up and the thought came to me that I needed a beta test. And so I contacted a local counselor to a local LDS ward here in town. I'd only met him one time, invited him to my home. I said, I know you may think this is crazy, it's awful late, but this was the thought that came to me, that we should have a common Thanksgiving event. I played my video for him, and his response was, we're going to play that video and you're going to be the guest speaker at this event. And so as it unfolded, it was one of the local wards, but other wards were invited. About 200 people gathered at the local stake. And I had the chance to talk about Thanksgiving from a Latter-day Saint perspective, wove the story of the Pilgrims into the story of the Restoration. And then we had a fellowship afterwards, a Thanksgiving dinner that all the sisters of his ward had prepared. He asked me to invite several non-LDS people to the event, which I did, and many of them came. And it was a time, enriching time to talk about our common Thanksgiving theme through the vintage, or through the avenue of the Restoration.
Wow, that is great. And that must mean a lot to you, and to be able to engage. Now, was this at the Stake Center right by the Visitor Center?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so folks, if you in downtown, Independence, where of course the temple lot is, and of course you got the Community of Christ Temple right across the street from that. You have the LDS Visitor Center, and right next door is the Stake Center, which of course I was in last time I was there when we had that meeting, that Saturday morning meeting with them. So that's the place that you did that. And when does this just happen in the last few days?
It just happened last the 17th, last Friday evening.
Oh, wow. So it was a cool Friday night thing right before Thanksgiving. You and your peeps and the Latter-day Saints all got together and had a common Thanksgiving celebration. That must have just really meant a lot to you. I imagine you feel so grateful and thankful that that was able to happen.
Yeah, it was really a dream come true. And it was what I'd call a beta test, because I'd like to see that expand to a larger venue, and including other parts of the Restoration. Select speakers that could come and talk about the thankfulness they have for their expression of the Latter-day work, and how we could weave those testimonies together and unite it with our American Thanksgiving expression. Wow. To enrich the whole story.
Well, that's great. Well, you never know. Maybe a year from now, maybe I'll be helping you put together something, maybe in Utah. You never know. That is extraordinary. I think that, and really, honestly, that's really, that's a fruit that has been that's coming out of your ministry, right? To kind of bring back the gathering together of all these disparate parts that have kind of been scattered. You're trying to help bring them together. You would say that this is really probably an important thing in your ministry that happened.
Oh, absolutely. You know, Stephen, if you go back to when the Pilgrims first embarked on their trip and spent 66 days on the ocean and finally landed here in the Promised Land, there was an indentured servant on that ship. His name was John Howland. He was an indentured servant to John Carver. And of course, they were part of the Virginia colony. And they were to land in New York and got blown off course and went much further north to Plymouth. And as a result, they were outside the Virginia colony's jurisdiction. They had no sovereign but God and no ruler, no king but Jesus. But on board that ship, there was a terrible storm and they were all underneath. And John Hallen had gone up on deck and was thrown overboard. And he went under the water, was able to hold on to a rope, but he was under the water for some time. They were able to rescue him. And what's interesting is John Howland is 7 generations from Joseph Smith in a direct line through Lucy Mack Smith. He married a girl that was on board that ship. Her name was Elizabeth Tilley, and she's 7 generations from Elizabeth Tilley in a direct line is Emma Hale Smith. And of course, Joseph and Emma married each other. And so those 2 lines came together, both off the Pilgrim trip. And here we are, 7 generations after that. We have another opportunity for the restoration to come together and be wedded back together, just like it was on that ship.
Oh, that's fascinating. What an interesting detailed story there. I'm sure that's going to resonate with a lot of the saints. And then of course, we all know that Joseph came from Pilgrim stock, but you kind of forget that these were real people on a real boat, time and place. And to recognize if he had fallen off that boat and didn't survive, that changes everything, right? So I think we have to be grateful for that.
Well, we have to recognize there's a divine destiny that wishes to shape our lives. And through the vantage point of the restoration, we see that very clearly in the story of the Pilgrims and how those 2 lines come together. And of course, after they come together, then we have the continuity through Joseph Smith's lineage coming all the way down to us today.
Okay, wow, that's great. Now, I just want to ask you, Patrick, over the course of the last year, since last Thanksgiving, a lot of things have happened. I think one of the things that really, one of my highlights has become going to Independence, Missouri, which of course, this is Zion, I mean, this is an important place in the restoration. You get to live right there in the middle of Zion. That's where you grew up. I mean, although you grew up in California, that's right, but that's where you live now. And it must just be exciting for you to be in that place, a very important place, and to kind of be at the center point, really, of everything. And I just wanted to talk about how I enjoy and what I'm grateful for and thankful for is that you embraced me early on with the channel. Well, I had maybe 150, 200 subscribers, if that. I don't know. I didn't have even 100 subscribers the first time you came on my program. Okay. And then later that fall we did, and I think probably because you did Thanksgiving episode is probably what inspired me to have you come on and do a Thanksgiving episode on my channel. And then, that first time I come out there and I spoke at the Book of Mormon Rally. And then earlier this year, I got to speak at the Book of Mormon Rally /symposium that you did with organized with your brother and others, Casey Griffiths and all that. And then again, I got me. And then this time I brought along David Boice of 52 Churches in 52 Weeks. And both of us have posted stuff about your rally on our channels, and it's gotten thousands and thousands of views. And so we're grateful to you. I'm speaking on behalf of David as well. We're just really grateful that you have opened up so kindly your doors to us. And what was so nice is that last time David and I got to spend some time, spending time at in your basement, attending an interdenominational service of people from different branches of the restoration and 2 Protestants, David and I. And we broke bread afterwards, had a wonderful lunch with each other, and got to fellowship with you guys. And so I just want to thank you, David. I think you're an awesome human being. And on behalf of David and I just want to thank you and say that we're very grateful for you entrusting us to come up on stage and actually talk at a Book of Mormon Rally. And really, honestly, it's one of the highlights of my life every time I get to do that.
Well, we appreciate you coming. You made a statement that you held the Book of Mormon up and told the audience that the Book of Mormon had saved your life.
Yep.
David Boice, who said he was unfamiliar with Joseph Smith or the Book of Mormon growing up, wasn't really familiar with it at all. But in his process of visiting 52 churches in 52 weeks, he visited 4 separate Restoration churches and said, I still don't know much about the Restoration, but I do know I've met people who embrace that book and they have captured my imagination, my attention. And so those are 2 real positive testimonies to open dialogue and discussion among those who profess a belief in this book. We call this book the magnum opus of the Restoration. It is the primary work, the cornerstone of our religion. And, you know, when you weave it with the story of the Pilgrims, they wanted to come here to make a refuge for Israel, build a holy city, take the gospel to the Indians. And the idea of the Reformation or the Protestant Reformation actually finds fulfillment in the Restoration. Out of this particular wilderness, God called his church forth, and with the idea that we would too build a city on a hill, just like John Winthrop wrote, that succeeding plantations would see that we were as a city on a hill. And so we thank you for coming, Steve. We thank you. We believe this is the land of Zion. It's not yet Zion, but yet it is the land of Zion, and there's great promise here. And we believe Zion will be built by the gathering of the saints, beginning at this place.
Yeah, and that's so interesting. You know, one of the things that I had also mentioned at the rally was the idea of there was no more matter of ites. And I think there's Brighamites and there's Josephites, there's Cutlerites, there's all these ites. And I think the time has come that we no longer we get rid of all the ites. And then I think that's almost prophetic in my mind, that the Book of Mormon's kind of condemning the scattering, in that it's saying, hey, it's now lay aside all the ites and come back together. That's precisely what happens in the Book of Mormon. And I hope to see, and I know that you're hoping to see, that replayed in the modern era as well.
I thought it was pretty impressive that an evangelical such as yourself would stand and declare to the audience that you said, what's wrong with you Latter-day Saints? You have so many ites among you. Why can't you find common ground and come together? I thought it was a real good chiding that you gave us, and it was well appreciated, well received. I think it gave people pause and consideration that those outside the Restoration perhaps see us more clearly than we see ourselves at times.
Oh, that's fascinating. Thank you for sharing that. It really, really means a lot. And so I also want to talk about, you have such a great friendship with Casey Griffiths and the work that he's doing. I just want you to talk about your friendship with him and how much it means to you to have Casey Griffiths in your life.
Well, Casey's a dynamic personality. He's engaging. He's very bright, and he's committed to finding opportunities to work together. Had a chance to go out there this October with Gary Whiting, and we visited BYU. Went to lunch with Casey and some other professors. Was invited to speak in his class, and I'll tell you a real interesting account. I was in Independence early in the summer. I went to a Starbucks and I saw 2 sister missionaries sitting outside. And, typically LDS folks don't go to Starbucks. They certainly don't drink coffee. Mm-hmm. So I thought that was a little unusual, but they were witnessing to a young man who had recently joined their church. Mm-hmm. And after he walked away, I introduced myself to him and we had a nice conversation. And in the midst of that conversation, another young lady walks into Starbucks and she stands right up, introduces herself, and shares with her her testimony, offers her a Book of Mormon, invites her to a young person's congregation. And I was pretty impressed with her. We had a nice dialogue, discussion together. Then I never saw her again. This past fall, I was at BYU, was invited to speak in Casey's class, had about 200 students there, and spoke for about 15 minutes. And then we left and we're on our way to Logan, Utah, to a Book of Mormon Study Association. I get a text message from Sister Westora, and she says, Patrick, I met you at Starbucks this past summer. I'm now off my mission. I'm enrolled at BYU, and I was in Casey Griffith's class when you spoke. And it was pretty remarkable. So how small the world is.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Wow. That's a wonderful story. And oh yeah. And of course you said, so did you go, so you went for the second year in the row to the Book of Mormon Studies Association?
I did, out in Logan, Utah.
Yeah, and so of course Christopher Thomas, our good friend, was just stepped down as the president. He was the founding president of the Book of Mormon Studies Association. I imagine you're very grateful to him. Just be kind of him showing you hospitality as well. I imagine you're thankful to that for him for that.
Oh, very thankful. He's again a very engaging individual, and he's a Pentecostal. Teaches at a university there. I think it's in Kentucky.
So
Uh,
Cleveland, Tennessee. Cleveland, Tennessee.
Cleveland, Tennessee. Okay. And anyway, he's an interesting individual, and he spoke a little bit about the Book of Mosiah there at that conference and shared some of his appreciation for some of the textual nature of the Book of Mormon. And so we met a lot of different people there, and some of them are pretty highbrow, pretty academic, but learned a lot, and found myself, along with my friend Gary, engaged in a lot of conversation with fellow people within what I like to term the constellation of Mormonism. In the Protestant world, you have a myriad of churches, all based on the Bible. They believe in the divine authenticity of the Bible. Many believe that it's inerrant, and yet there are so many translations. That's kind of curious to me. Within the Restoration, if we could find common ground under the banner of the Book of Mormon, we could find, in many ways, the same kind of continuity you find in the Protestant world. If you embrace Jesus and accept the Bible, you all fit under the banner of the church. And we'd like to see that same kind of expression within the fabric of the Restoration.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's important that happens because, I really feel like there's been real good faith efforts by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to have conversations with the evangelical world, whether it's with, of course they've been very gracious to me that I don't have any formal relationship with the church, but I have an informal relationship with the church, and that they have made it very clear that I'm a good guy and I'm not an enemy to the church. And then Jeff McCullough of Hello Saints has since moved to Utah, and actually the story of him moving to Utah is a miracle in and of itself. And you have the work of David Boice, and you have Dr. Kyle Bashirs, and you have Dr. Christopher Thomas, and you got my friend Allison and others who are part of the evangelical world, who are engaging the Restoration in a very different way. And so, first of all, I just want to say I'm very grateful to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. For all those of you, I know many of you that work in the church office building. I know many of you work at BYU, many of the professors. I just want to say I'm very grateful for how well I've been treated by the branch, but this is by the Utah branch. But this is the thing. At the same time that they want to have more relationship and fellowship with evangelicals, they need to also recognize the need, and I think they're starting to also engage other branches of the Restoration. Engage the Community of Christ, engage the independent Restorationists in there, and all these other Book of Mormon believing people. That there needs to be also a dialogue happening that's happening similarly in the evangelical world. And I think that you and Casey and others are in the forefront of that movement. And I do think that this has the potential to really be something important in your movement. What do you say to that?
Well, I agree with that. Of course, with our Book of Mormon Symposium and Roundtable, we've gathered not only members of the LDS faith and the Restoration Branch movement, but we've extended the hand of fellowship to the Church with the Elijah Message, the Church of Christ on the Temple Lot, the Church of Jesus Christ, headquartered in Monongahela, Pennsylvania. And we've sat around a table and had dialogue and discussion, talked about how this idea of a Book of Mormon Symposium and Roundtable can get legs and can continue to migrate among us as a people. And so we're in the initial stages, although we've been at it for several years. We're at the point now where we can have dialogue without heat and debate. We're able to come together on what we agree on. And it's been fruitful, it's been enriching, and it shows great potential that we can come together, labor shoulder to shoulder, with the anticipation that one day we could see eye to eye.
Oh, yeah, it's interesting. Folks, I just want to tell you that, for those of you who are visiting in the Independence area, you need to look up somebody like Patrick, and also look up some of the different branches of the Restoration that are there. Also, stop at Price Publishing bookstore. That's a real interesting place. Talk to different voices within the Restoration there while you're there. Don't just go to the visitor center broaden out the scope, because there's a lot of interesting, fascinating things going on in your neck of the woods, where you really see this intersection going on in the land of Zion. But also what's happening, it appears to me that there's a lot of Latter-day Saints from Utah that are buying property and moving there as well. I'm hearing that from a lot of people. So it seems like there's even more of an engagement now than there probably ever has been, at least in recent memory. Would you agree to that?
Well, yeah, just recently I talked to a fellow that's involved in real estate, and he said there's 300 families that have purchased property up in far west area, which is up, 35 to 45 miles north of here. And this is from the island of Tonga. And these are Latter-day Saints, LDS Latter-day Saints, who want to purchase property here. I'm not sure this is under the direction of the church. I think these are just individuals who feel the prompting, the whispering of the Spirit to come and establish themselves in the state of Missouri. They believe things are changing in the world and want to be in a place that they feel has been designated as a gathering place for God's people and in preparation for the storm that's blowing upon our nation.
And across the world in many ways as well. Well, that's really interesting to hear that. And it's just hearing a lot of different reports. But then also one of the cool things too is that there are some evangelicals and Pentecostals in the independence area that are also engaging the restoration in some new and unique ways. Maybe you want to speak about that a little bit, because that's kind of under the radar screen for a lot of people. But there's a thawing going on, I think, in some ways. Are you seeing that?
I think certainly there is. Unfortunately, our country is becoming very polarized. And as a result, we're finding that we need to build relationships with people who share the larger vision of America's divine destiny, the value of family, holding on to our Judeo-Christian perspective. And so there's a coalescing of people who share those inherent beliefs. And I think we're finding that we do have a need to come together and have common understanding about some things, work together, labor together for a cause that's bigger than any one of us, to preserve the liberty that we so much cherish.
So I wanted to ask you, Patrick, what's on the calendar for next year? What kind of events are you planning? You may not have the dates yet, but maybe just give us and of course, we'll have you come back on to promote these events. But what do you have on the drawing board for next year?
Well, we have a tentative date in April for another Book of Mormon symposium and rally.
Okay.
And we hope that can, of course, broaden, and we can continue to involve other parts of the restoration and even those outside. As you know, Stephen, we've had a Catholic priest, we've had a Lutheran, we've had a Pentecostal, and we hope to have others who have some appreciation for the book. Maybe they don't look at the book quite the way we do, but they're not enemies to the book. They're finding the book has value, and they can have dialogue with others who in the Christian community like yourself. One of the things that I appreciate, Stephen, is that you've got a lot of people in the restoration talking to each other that never visited with one another before. Having been on your show, you've been able to penetrate some of these individuals, make them known to some of us, and we've then been able to take those interviews and reach out to people and begin having dialogue with people previously that we didn't know or really were not aware of what their stature was in the restoration. So these are the kind of things that continue to proliferate among us. And part of that has to do with some of the work you've done. And so, again, we're grateful, appreciative, and thankful that you have been as open as you have been in creating this kind of dialogue.
Well, thank you, Patrick. That means a lot to me. And, it goes without saying that every year we have to ask the one and most important question. And he's a little caught off this year, but I'd like to know, who is that guy with a beard behind you? Maybe talk a little bit about that. There he is.
That's Joseph Smith III. That particular painting is a daguerreograph, and it was in the Kirtland Temple. It was in the basement. It has a little watermark down in the little corner there, and it was going to be discarded. And a friend of mine, a fellow that married my wife and I many years ago, Tommy Thomas, gave me that picture. Wow. And so Joseph is about 50 years old in that picture, very stately looking with his beard. And he is the prophet of the reorganization, the first president of the reorganized church, and a descendant of Joseph Smith, his oldest son.
Well, that's always great. And I really love the RLDS tradition. I have, of course, friends in the community of Christ and all the different groups that are independence based. I find them to be wonderful people. Actually, this year, I don't know if you know this or not, but I gave a presentation at the John Whitmer Historical Association in Texas, Fredericksburg, Texas this year. And that was a really cool thing. And actually, I believe there was even a member who's affiliated with your group there as well. I didn't have a chance to talk to him, but he asked a question in the audience, and I got the feeling that he had an association with you. And I apologize, I don't have his name, but it's just really cool to be able to engage the reorganization as well. It's an interesting history. And I really enjoy engaging the people like Lachlan Mackay and John Hamer. Of course, these are with the community of Christ, but I do think that these are fruits of Joseph Smith III and Emma. This is Joseph Smith, the family church tradition. And you come out of that. That is your tradition. And I think that people in Salt Lake and Utah and in the Mormon corridor need to be more aware of the history of the reorganization, the Prairie Saints, if you will, as they're often called. And I want to thank you for always coming on to inform the audience about this really interesting history that many of them are not even aware of.
Well, it's interesting. On September 22nd, 1827, Joseph Smith retrieved the plates from Hill Cumorah under the administration of, we testify, of the angel Moroni. 200 years later, where we are, and it happened that Wallace B. Smith, the son of W. Wallace Smith, the grandson of Joseph Smith Jr., just passed away on that date this past September. He was the last Smith to preside over the reorganized church, and he just passed away. So that's a real historical mooring for us in the reorganization, the promise of a lineal descendancy within the leadership of the reorganized church. And of course, that was changed in 2001 when that process was altered, and it's caused a fragmentation within the reorganization and helped lead to what we call the Restoration Branch movement. But all of these things are part and parcel of our history, and they can't be denied or ignored. We have to deal with them and look at them and see how we can take this historical blueprint we've given and how we can use it building the work as we go forward.
Oh, that's great. And of course, I want to, that's a picture of the stone church back there too. Is that the
Yeah, there's the stone church, there's the auditorium, there's the gospel ship that went to Tahiti. They were told it could only be used for missionary work. They sailed out of San Francisco. It was 75 feet long. They went to Tahiti, and some individuals there wanted to use it for commerce, and it sunk. So it was meant to be, it was just called the gospel ship, meant to do missionary work.
Oh, fascinating. Well, always a pleasure to come and visit you. Always a pleasure to come in your study and hear these stories about these unique items that you have. Patrick, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm very thankful to you, and I'm glad to call you a friend. Thanks for coming on.
Well, I want to wish you and yours a very happy Thanksgiving. It's right before us. And I do want to add one last thing, Stephen, if I could. The children of Israel, by 720 BC, had been peeled off the land, the northern kingdom. And they went north and west and lost their identity. The Apostle Paul in the New Testament says, "In Isaac shall thy seed be called." So they would now be the sons of Isaac, or Isaac's sons. As the children of Israel, many migrated through northwestern Europe. They ended up in England. And the French gave England the name Angleterre, which meant the end of the earth. And so these would be Isaac's sons, or Saxons at the end of the earth, or they would be Anglo-Saxons. And these Anglo-Saxons, descendants of them, came to America. And out of the Pilgrims who created the Mayflower Compact, which had to do with personal liberty and governing ourselves with law for the people and by the people, that led to what we have today in our Constitution. It's interesting that the hand of God has been leading these individuals, the children of Israel, through the wilderness until they appear here in the Americas. And of course, God called his church forth out of the wilderness, fair as the sun, clear as the moon, and terrible as an army with banners, to complete the Puritan hope that we see realized in Zion's redemption. So thanks for the opportunity to bear my testimony, Stephen, to speak of the goodness of God, bear testimony of the work, and to thank God for people such as you. One last thought, Stephen, when Slavic people would build any important building, they would place on the cornerstone a living creature. I guess it was their idea that in so doing, they would give vitality and continuity and life to that structure. Well, under the American structure, we have great men and women who have fought, bled, and died and prayed for our country. And under the cornerstone of the Restoration, we have many saints who have prayed, sung, preached, and longed for Zion. And so I'm grateful to be a Latter-day Saint. I'm grateful to be a member of this great nation. And I look forward to the time when by our faith, we might become recipients of all the glories that God desires to reveal to his people in these last days when he comes again to pick up his jewels. May God bless you. May you have a wonderful Thanksgiving, Brother Steve.
And to you as well. So I want to thank everybody. I'm very grateful and thankful to all of the people who are subscribers to my channel, as well as those of you who are financially supporting the channel. There are links in the description that if you'd like to give to the channel, I'd really do appreciate it. Couldn't do it without you. Don't forget our merch store, MormonBookReviews.com, in which you can buy hats and assorted t-shirts and hoodies and what have you at our merch store. That also helps financially support the channel as well. And I want to thank you all. And just remember this, folks, the most important thing is this. Remember, all the voices of the Restoration will be heard here on Mormon Book Reviews.